I was charged by a moose. Um, and at the time, I was processing so slowly with other things going on around me that I didn't react to it. And I didn't know if it was real or if it was a hallucination because I'd been having so many up to that point.
If there's somebody on the fence of pushing themselves or going to be doing something that's scary or uncomfortable for them, what would you say to them?
Something that an Indian friend once told me, which is,
What makes somebody leave the safety of the lecture hall to test their body against jungles, deserts, and the frozen north? Today's guest has spent most of his life testing limits in science and in the wild. He's an adventurer, an ultra-endurance racer, and an academic with a PhD in biomechanics and neuromuscular physiology. He lectures, writes, and consults on everything from injury rehab to exploration safety. But what fascinates me the most is how he's brought it all together, combining science and survival to take on some of the toughest environments on Earth. In this episode, we dive into the science of performance, the stories behind the extremes of endurance racing, and the lessons you only learn when failure isn't just a possibility, it's likely. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
thank you very much for having me here.
Let's jump straight in. When people ask what you do, how do you answer it?
Nowadays, I mostly go straight for senior lecturer in exercise physiology at Oxford Brookes University. That sounds professional, and it certainly covers the day-to-day reality.
Yeah, brilliant. And what makes somebody leave, say, the lecture hall to test their bodies against jungles, deserts, and the frozen north? Where did that sort of buzz for life come from?
I think I've always really enjoyed the outdoors, being active, whether that starting out in the scouting movement, I think, and parents actually taking me away on holidays where there'd always be some sort of physical component, cycling or hiking or something like that. And then there was a lull through a good number of years until I saw a television documentary of Ben Fogle mucking around in the desert doing the Marathon des Sables, and that was a good inspiration for me because at the time I had friends in Cairo, so that was the Egyptian Sahara, that I'd go out and I had experiences walking there or riding horses or walking horses just for the company. So I had some confidence, kind of coupled with a degree in exercise physiology, that I should be able to train up to complete that race. When I went out there was going to be a one-off, but actually it just sort of opened my eyes to that whole world of ultra endurance adventure racing, and it just seemed like a really good way of seeing part of the world that you wouldn't normally see in a fairly controlled way, in that there was a sort of race structure to it. So that got me into it, and then I became quite passionate about doing that. So really enjoyed it and would always look for opportunities to go back and do those sorts of events.
And I imagine you get to see the world in a completely different way as well. Okay, yes, in a race environment, but you're on foot or paddleboarding or whatever it is, rather than a plane, car, or an open bus tour
Yeah,
somewhere, isn't it?
absolutely. And it's the bits that I really enjoy. So after the desert, I did a race in the jungle, and we were going through these sort of rural communities with the real Amazonian people. Yeah, that was an incredible experience, and that's not something that you'd get on some kind of tour where you bust out to those places. These were people who opened their communities to us, so we could set up camps as we moved through. In the northern races, then we're going through sort of First Nations communities, very small towns with very rich histories. And again, it's not something that you'd get just from like a driving tour or something of the area.
A package holiday, would it really?
Yeah, it wouldn't be the same.
And then I suppose it's almost like having your own version. I think it was a BBC programme called Try with Bruce Parry, where he'd go off and do all of those Amazonian villages and places where people haven't been, that you can't just go down to the travel agent and book off and go.
Fortunately, yeah.
Yeah. Let's jump into some of your adventures, and let's start with one of the toughest or the longest challenges, which is, I think, is the Iditarod Invitational.
The
Is that
Iditarod.
right?
The Iditarod is that one. Yeah, that was the latest. Definitely the toughest of the sort of organised events that I've ever done. And yeah, great story to it, which is that about 100 years ago. You know, when you start saying something's great and positive and then you realize that you're about to go somewhere very dark. There's a great story based on a dark event, and ultimately hundreds of lives were saved by dog teams taking a diphtheria serum across rural Alaska at a time when it wasn't possible to fly the serum in. Planes weren't really that reliable in winter in 1925 in rural Alaska. But there was a diphtheria outbreak. The only way to get serum to the communities was using dog teams. And so that's what happened. The serum went up on train from Anchorage or wherever it was as close as it could, and that left some hundreds and hundreds of miles for dog teams to work in relays together to transport this serum in a brutal winter, where the serum is in these sort of glass vials or whatever it is in wooden crates on rickety sleds with mushers and these dog teams bouncing all over the ground with mountains, rivers, and a necessity that the serum can't freeze, it can't break. Controlling, absolutely incredible, but it was done through dog teams. So some years ago, it was kind of spotted that there weren't so many dog teams around in Alaska anymore. It was kind of a tradition that was dying out. And so someone decided that we should get the dog races happening again to try and bring the dog teams back and kind of honor this important part of history of Alaska. So a dog race came out, which was the Iditarod. And then about 25 years ago, a human-powered event started. So that's what I did, and people would either do it on foot or on skis or on fat bike. The year that I did that, which was 24, it was the first year anyone finished it on skis within the 30-day cutoff. And there'd been fewer than 30 people in those 25 years who had finished it on foot. So it really was an event where you're starting with no real idea that you're going to finish it. Some years no one finishes at all. Some years a few people on fat bike manage to get through. Usually the fat bike is the more efficient way of getting across, and even if conditions are horrendous, they don't stay horrendous forever, and there'll be breaks when the guys on bikes can really fly. Whereas on foot, you're kind of limited to a fairly steady pace. It can become slower, but there isn't scope for it to get much faster. So 30 days is quite a tall order for about 1,000 miles.
I was going to say, how long was it? But 1,000 miles in 30 days, and I imagine the snow is not just a couple of centimetres.
No. Some years it's low and you can move quite quickly. Some years it's quite a few meters, or there'll be half a meter or more that falls the weekend at the start of the race, and it's not sort of very well broken trail all the way through, so you're really susceptible to the elements. That can be the be all and end all of the race, rather than anything to do with physical capacity, experience, equipment, any of that. It can just be the weather's been bad for half a day, and that's it.
You done.
Yeah.
Wow. So you, like you say, you would have done X amount of training. You've got your kit list fully subscribed. You've crunched the numbers to do that. But Mother Nature comes in and dumps a load of snow, or the wind is just howling and you're pushing in and you're actually not making any progress.
Yeah, it could just be a bit warm. When the trail gets really soft, and then you're sort of struggling through, floundering around in soft snow, or a bit windy, and then the wind just carries the snow across the trail without any need for actual snowfall. There are lots of things that will slow progress. So yeah, it's quite something.
That's a tough one, but nice they're still including the history of why it was there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I say it was 100 years this year since the serum run.
And you've raced through the desert, the jungle, and the Arctic, or up in Alaska. Which environment do you think has tested you the most, and why?
Well, actually, this is a tough one that comes back. People want to know what's like the toughest race or the toughest environment. And I kind of view it as it's either tough to move a mile, like physiologically, this is an environment where we really struggle to be able to make progress, or it's tough to complete the race because of all the things that could happen over that time. So sort of the toughest for a mile, the toughest as a physiological challenge is high altitude. It's that challenge of getting oxygen into the muscles and to be able to perform exercise. So I did a race some years ago, which was 222 kilometers, and it went over a couple of very high mountain passes, and it was in the Himalayas. So yeah, it was very high altitude, and that was, I think, starting at over 14,000, going up to 17,000 or so. Yeah, that was physiologically incredibly tough to get through, and it took a couple of days, and it was a storm that caused us to run away and have a brief break before getting through again. But it was physiologically very, very difficult simply because of the environment. So hot during the day, very cold at night, and all the time you've got the altitude to deal with. So that was an incredible challenge, and I really enjoyed it for finding out what it's like to be working that hard in that environment. But the toughest to finish overall would be the Iditarod. And there may be other harder races out there. If you've got a race where you have a particular distance and a particular cutoff, and you have to be able to run whatever it is, 100 or so miles, maintaining a really good pace, and that's difficult. The Spartathlon, for example, in Greece, kind of honours the original marathon, and it's 153 miles, and I think it's 36 hours to complete. You need to do the first 100 miles in about 20 hours. So there's kind of a time pressure earlier on, and if you can get through that, the rest of it gets sort of easier, relatively speaking, if you haven't broken yourself during the first couple of
But
marathons.
the time pressure becomes less.
Yes, yeah.
You could then, if it was very hot, just ease back the pace a little bit so you can maintain a steady tick over. But if you're at 19 hours and 59 minutes and you got the checkpoint coming up, you've got to push yourself to get through, haven't you?
So there are events like that that are really brutal because of that time pressure. But yeah, the Iditarod I think is the toughest event that I've ever participated in. The first time I tried it, couldn't get through, couldn't finish. So there's a finish point-ish miles in, which is where most people race to. So I did that once. I did another 1,000-mile event, which was the Yukon Quest. And so then I came back to this race to do the 1,000. And it was just something like between 3 and 4 meters of snowfall over the season, over half a meter of snowfall the weekend before the race. And we were all trudging through very slowly. That was in 2020. So it was the start of COVID. So that was just a whisper on the wind when we were starting the race, and it was becoming more and more of an issue as we were going through, learning that communities might not be happy for us to move through, that there were impacts on transport. And it isn't a race where you can just sort of stop somewhere and you'll get picked up and transported away. You have to look after yourself, so you have to get your own exit points. Even if you're injured or something, you need to have your own exit strategy. So I made it to the 300-mile finish point, having taken so much longer than the first time I raced because of the conditions, realized that it was very sketchy that I'd be able to do another almost 700 miles of trail I had never done before because of how slow it was. And then with the COVID, unclear of whether or not I'd be able to kind of get back to the UK. So I pulled the plug at this McGrath finish point. As it turned out, 2 people finished on bike that year and no one else. After this McGrath point, the race organisation has nothing to do with what remains. There's no checking of trail conditions. There is no trail if you're fast enough. You have to kind of wait for the dog teams to come through and actually break trail for you. So that means that some of the fat bikers who ride at the front end up having to wait for a couple of days for the dog teams to come through and create a trail for them.
What are the type of bikes you have? What would they look like? Like not a normal road bike, obviously.
No, they do look more like the e-bikes in terms of those huge fat tyres on them. So big wheels, big tyres. When the race was first done, those didn't exist. You didn't have fat bikes. So you'd have people with normal mountain bikes, so even less likely to finish. And then it became adapted mountain bikes. You'd have sort of 2 wheels or 3 wheels. People just get quite creative, and then someone created the fat bikes. So very chunky tires with or without metal studs in them for grip. And so I've used those on expeditions, but I've never used one in a race before. They're really good fun. They're very efficient. And a challenge that year, so 2 people got through. There are lots of other people trying, including on fat bikes. There's a crossing that year would have been around 25 miles across Norton Bay. So it's sea ice. And the winds shifted and the Bering Sea came in over the top to between a metre and a metre and a half depth. So that just washed over the trail. So behind those two at the front, everyone else couldn't make the crossing because there was
There's a
just
sea
deep,
there, wasn't there?
deep water, yes. And dog teams that had already crossed were then trying to get along the trail, along the coastal section where there was still this water washing in. So there was a huge rescue for the dog teams. So that's a separate race that we used their trail, and a couple of bikers managed to get through ahead of the storm and ahead of the water. But that was it. So no one finished. They all had to get flights out of this little town called Shaktoolik that sits on the coast of Norton Bay, part of Norton Sound.
Wow. And when you look back, was there, overall the races you've done so far, was there a single race or expedition that really changed how you see yourself?
Yeah, I think that it was the Yukon Quest. So that was another route of a dog race. So there are two big dog races in the world. There's the Iditarod and there's the Yukon Quest. They're both around 1,000 miles. And when I did my first of the Arctic Ultras, that was the Yukon, and it was 430 miles thereabouts between Whitehorse and Dawson City. And I did that race 3 times, completed it each time. It's quite straightforward compared to the Iditarod. They break the trail. It's very good conditions for the trail itself. So however much it snows, there's a good trail under it. So it is more straightforward to get to the end of that one. But I'd always done the foot race, which was this 430 miles. The rest of the distance, what the dog teams did, wasn't kind of accessible to me within the race format. So I went out there and did it independently. That was all the planning myself. It was completely independent of any race or organization. I left a week before the dogs, knowing that there would be some of the trail put in by a trail team for the dog race. A week and a half after leaving to 2 weeks after, I'd have all of the dogs overtake me. So again, if I'd lost the trail because of weather conditions, the dogs would break trail ahead of me. And my expectation was that would get me through the Alaska half of the race. So it then goes into the Yukon in Canada. And then that was the bit that I'd done 3 times before. So I knew it. So that was fairly heavy kit for me, not my super light racing gear, because there wouldn't be places for me to get resupplies on the way. So that was all independent. It was really great conditions. It was a low snow year, so there wasn't very much snow on the trail, which means that navigation is quite difficult when there's deep snow and you've had lots of traffic along it from like skidoos and the dog teams and so on. They compact the trail down so you can see it. It's almost like this sunken hard trail and then visibly very soft trail around it. If it's a low snow year, so there's only a few centimetres of snow that's fallen, if it gets blown over with some wind, just sort of blowing some snow into the trail, or there's some snowfall, you can't see the trail anymore and you can't feel it because it's all thin everywhere. So navigationally it's hard, but as long as that doesn't happen, or whilst that's not happened, you're quite fast because it's frozen ground underneath the snow, so you can move quite quickly. It's very efficient. There are a few kind of nightmare days out there where conditions were bad, but for the most part, it was really straightforward. It went really well. There was a reroute because of there's a lot of river sections, and when the river freezes, you get sort of ice chunks moving along that then all kind of get thrown together, and it becomes it's called jumble ice. You've just got these huge blocks of ice the size of cars all smashed together. And if there isn't a route around that and the trail team can't break a trail over the top of them, they have to find some other way. So there was a highway in that area that goes over another mountain range. It's called the Top of the World Highway, and I imagine it must be fantastic in the summer. In the winter, you wouldn't know there was any kind of road there. It's just mountains with a trail. But it was one of the only years I think that they've used that, and it was fantastic. So it's kind of privileged to be up there, completely remote, away from everything, a trail that not many people would see in the winter. And it was just me by myself. The dog teams had gone through a fortnight before. So yeah, absolutely loved it. Got all of these mountain ranges plus an extra one. And I was absolutely in my element, just out enjoying it.
And you said about the different kits you would have brought. You had obviously your race kit, which you said was lighter, and then you actually had to plan to survive. So obviously, you're not only just walking these distances or running them, you've got to bring your survival kit with you as well, which I'd
Yes.
imagine is a conundrum between efficiency,
Mm.
but also if the weather changes, I've got enough supplies to weather down a storm for 1 or 2 days that you don't end up running out of food or running out of energy, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly that. So instead of a race where you can usually have drop bags, so every 100 miles or so, you could have some food that you've posted on ahead. I took all the food I'd need for 30 days, plus all the fuel that I might need for melting snow for water. So there was much more weight. And you're still trying to go light, but you know that you're not going to have these exit opportunities that you might have during a race where you've got checkpoints along the way. There was that independent requirement to have more survival gear, but still wanting to keep everything light so I can maintain fairly good progress. But the mentality was very different as well. So in a race, you're going as light as possible, and you don't care that you're going to be going as brutal as you can to do big distances, and you don't care that you're only sleeping for a few hours a day. You're just getting through. Whereas for this, it's like, well, I'm never going to come through here again. I'm going to enjoy the experience as much as possible. So there'd be kind of short days where I'm going to stay at a town along the way, and I'm going to see it before I leave. Or there'll be some cabins that are relatively close together. So I'm going to have some short days so I can stay in some cabins and enjoy that kind of part of the history, that part of the landscape, versus when I'm racing, so I'm going to push through. I'm going to stop at some point between midnight and 2 a.m. Going to sleep for 4 to 6 hours and then push on. It's like, well, no, I'm going to enjoy this experience as much as I can because I'm not against the clock. I'm trying to do something that hadn't been done before. There was a German racer who had done like 95% of the route. For some reason, he started a little way in. He started at the first town after the start. So yeah, it was this thing. I just had to finish it.
Finish it. And then with a lot of those things, then how going those extreme things, you can't just think, oh, one weekend I'll go to the local outdoor shop and buy some kit and go. How many years did it sort of take you to get into the ultras? Because obviously you've been doing it nearly enough 20 odd years now, 18 odd years. How do you get involved, or how did you start, or what sort of fitness would be required to get into those?
Yeah, so some of this depends really on personal goals. So with the Marathon des Sables, I gathered from the documentary when I first watched it that 10% of people walked the whole thing. So in that case, you just need a hiking background. You just need to be able to walk every day. And there'll be forums and things where you can learn about what kit's required. And for those sorts of races, they have so much essential mandatory kit that you have to have that it kind of ticks all those boxes for you. So even if you don't have the background in it, you're doing an organized event where they really want to look after you. They want you to get through. So you have all of these lists, you have to have all of this equipment. And then for things that you don't know about, the forums kind of point you in the right direction. So what food you need and what's the best way of getting through. So then it becomes more of an issue of, well, what do you personally want to achieve? Do you just want to walk it and get to the end? Do you want to try and win it or be in amongst the elites, have a podium finish? Or do you just want to say, do yourself proud? Maybe if it's your first time and you've got nothing to compare it to, you think, well, okay, I don't want to just walk it. I want to do better than that. But you know that you don't have the experience of the elites and so on. So a lot of it comes down to, personal goals, which makes it really accessible to people.
Rather than, like you say, being an elite thinking I've got to go and do it. But if you've, say, done a couple of marathons for the last 5-6 years, actually
Yeah.
running a little bit further, you've got that reserve in it. Or like you say, if you're just an avid hiker around the UK and you've done a few hundred kilometers of hiking over the last decade, you've got some reserve and some understanding of how to pace yourself and map read, I suppose, and work off coordinates. I know races are sometimes signposted.
Yeah. So, those are differences that you kind of need to know about in advance. So some of them will have trail markers or they'll have something to guide you. Some of them will just be relying on GPS. Some of them they'll give you little route maps and things like that to help you. I've been doing this for 20 years or so, and something that's changed over that time is the sort of demographic of people doing these races. So I did the first of the Arctic races in 2009, and then it was very much people who had gone through the other ultras. They'd done the desert, they'd done the jungle or the mountains, whatever, and they wanted that new challenge. You were seeing racers there. You were seeing people who were very fit, very ambitious, and this was the next big thing on their list. Now, there are certainly some of the races where they're getting people who have no such background at all. At best, maybe weekend warriors,
Yeah.
but there's something in it's almost a bragging rights or like an ego thing. In certain workplaces, it used to be, oh, you've done a marathon, then it became, oh, you've done a triathlon, and now it's, oh, you've done this particular Arctic race, or you've done the spine race or something like that. And it's not people with that kind of background in ultra racing. It's more of a cultural shift that this is something that people want to do. I know this because I teach a course for people that have no background in the Arctic races who want to do it for the first time. So I teach about the hypothermia, about the frostbite, about the kit, about the race strategy, and about the training that's required for it. And when I'm talking about the training, I can see people just like kind of their eyes glaze over, like it's not what they're interested in. Um, it's kind of the important bit, really. You know, if you want to get to the end of a physical challenge, you need to be physically fit for it. And a lot of people view it quite differently. They say, oh, well, it's this distance, there are these cut-offs, so I only need to make whatever 30 miles a day, and that's a walkable distance. So, well, it's not always a walkable distance, not in deep snow, in bad weather, hauling kit in temperatures down to -50 or so.
The naivety of it sometimes, isn't it? That
Yeah,
you sometimes see a lot of people say, take, for example, Snowdon. Lots of people love to go up there. Now it's a queue all the time to
yeah,
get up to the summit. And you'll still see people that will go flip-flops, vest, and some
yeah,
shorts. And you're
yeah,
thinking, okay, it's not very tall, but the wind changes, the weather comes in,
yeah,
and you're in
yeah,
a manner of trouble. And that's only I suppose, a domestic, small little mountain in comparison to
yeah,
some of the stuff that you've gone. But the
yeah,
naivety of that, so I can do that. But until you've actually been there and realised that the snowdrifts can be 3-4 meters, and you are only going to be able to make so many meters in a day or an hour,
yeah,
because you've still got the weight of the kit you're carrying. And if you haven't got that physical reserve energy, you're going to be probably very treacle-like rather than a bit more efficient.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's it. I was talking sort of from the corporate angle, it's the workplace.
Yes.
What it used to be back in the day was that you got into these events because you were a runner and you were looking for a new challenge. Like you did some races and other people said, well, these races are available, and you got into it that way. Or someone talked you into a pub. You were sat there with your friends having a few beers and someone told you about this ridiculous event. And you think, well, yeah, okay, fine. That's so now you've got the workplace is an add-on to that, and we've got the social media as well. I think is one of the reasons for like the Snowden thing. So yeah, Insta and TikTok and so on, where you've got outdoor influencers who aren't really outdoors people, but that they've seen that as their angle. And I've been around Ben Nevis and done some walks out there and seen people beautifully dressed up and wearing dresses and high heels, and they're going out to a particular location because they want to have a particular photo taken that they have seen, yeah, on Insta or whatever. And it's just that's one
three
way to
hours
live
later,
your
you're
life.
seeing them, and 3 hours later, you're seeing the mountain rescue team going out and bringing them
Yeah,
down.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Which is quite, I imagine, is like you say, an interesting thing. And like coming back to that corporate thing, I'd imagine 20 years ago, it was a corporate golf day. Then it
Mm,
became a marathon, fun running,
yeah,
triathlons. Like you say, now probably the ego within that is, like, oh, you've only done a marathon. Well, I've done the Arctic. Or, oh, you've only done
yeah,
that. I can run in the Sahara. It's
yeah,
not necessarily a one-upmanship, but it's that,
yeah.
like you say, the culture in there. If we just park the endurance stuff for a
Okay.
moment, let's
Yeah,
go into your academic stuff, because that's a fascinating world in itself alone. So you're a senior lecturer now with a PhD in biomechanics and neuromuscular physiology,
Yeah.
teaching exercise science and sports nutrition. How do you balance that sort of academic life with your ultra endurance athlete side? How do you find the time to do all of that?
Yeah, it's certainly a difficult one to balance, especially wanting to develop career on one side. And I love the work as far as jobs go. What I've got now is absolutely fantastic for me. Really enjoy it. And I managed to kind of bridge between that sort of endurance world and the academic side as well. And they work together. So one of the reasons I got my current job is because of the background in the outdoors, in the endurance events, because I lead a module where I take my final year students. Currently, we go to the Atlas Mountains. We do an international field trip. We go to the mountains. They're collecting data that's relevant to sports science and physiology. So they're collecting heart rate data, they're collecting GPS data, so we can look at things like we're looking at their oxygen saturation to see how altitude is impacting them from that physiological perspective. And then there's a whole module built around that. So they do this 6-day trek in the mountains, they collect some really useful data. And then we're back in lecture rooms and in laboratories. One of the first things I do is we go into our altitude chamber at the university and I fire it up to the altitude that they were at during the trek, the highest point, the summit of Tubkal, over 4,000 meters. Just go and sit in there and we do the same sorts of things that we were doing in downtime during the trek and see, again, the impacts on our oxygen levels and so on. Gives us insights into things like the acclimatization that we got through the trek versus just walking into a room and being exposed to that altitude. We do that. We do a heat practical where there'll be temperatures around 35 degrees or so, doing exercise, doing performance tests. There's a cold one, which is fantastic because we recreate some kind of real life challenges from understanding academic kind of science of the cold and the survival requirements of the expeditions and the races. When you're exposed to the cold, there's this immediate response where your body reduces blood flow to your fingers, and so your fingers start getting cold and you lose dexterity, ability to do things. And then after 15 minutes or so, you get this big influx of blood back into those areas to try and protect them against frostbite. So that's referred to as that hunting response, but it's something measurable and it happens. So in the cold practical, part of it is putting their hands in these really cold water baths, monitoring the temperature of their fingers, and then getting them to do real world tasks afterwards, which include things like pulling on one of my big down jackets and pulling on my big expedition mitts and putting a harness buckle together or taking it off. It just so that the students can get this understanding of we're studying this, we're studying what happens from a physiological perspective, and we're seeing why it's relevant to know about it because it has real survival implications and it's relevant to frostbite and how we look after ourselves in the cold. So I've did this whole module essentially based on all the endurance stuff that I do, and then just some what would be much purer academic modules on human exercise physiology. But if you want to understand how people perform in a cold environment, just a cold day in the UK or the sort of peak of summer, and we're seeing this with things like racing, and we're seeing it with football tournaments where they're suddenly being held at really high temperatures and what impact that has on people and about safety and so on. To understand that, we look at the extremes anyway. So the cold, the heat, and the altitude all come back because they give really useful insights into the sort of extremes that we see within the UK and across where sports are performed in various tournaments. So they go together, and essentially I kind of got that role because of my background doing those events for real, because I can then teach using those examples which students find much more interesting than just the PowerPoints from sort of textbook examples.
And dare I say, going in and having your hands put in cold water. I mean, there's obviously the trend of people having ice baths and stuff, but just focusing the mind, controlling that as well, evolves when you're doing it in, I suppose, in the classroom or the lab of just putting your hands in. You don't really have the whole added, if I don't get my hands back in this and I don't get my jacket back on, I'm dead. And
Yeah.
that's the real realization when you're doing these extreme events or these high altitude events. It's not quite the same I imagine, in sport, because they've obviously got the team around them. But F1, you were saying, in the heat, even if they can, I don't know, even if you realize they're going to lose 4 kilos through fluid, they can then understand that this decline in fluid can mean this to their mental impairment, their reactions, therefore their likelihood of an accident increases by, or their lap time decreases by,
Yeah.
which is nice to
Yeah.
put the theoretical into actually a practical application, or experience it practically back into
Yeah.
it.
Absolutely, yeah. So we usually do sort of the theoretical, would have the lecture first and then follow it up with the practical fairly soon after. When it comes to heat, then we'll look at things like 1 to 2% dehydration will lead to performance decrements. So if you want to work with athletes and help them do as well as they can, then hydration's hugely important, and understanding how that's impacted by heat is some really useful insights. Yeah, sort of the basics would be, well, if you're sweating, you're losing water that's ultimately coming from your blood, giving you less blood to pump around your body. So your heart has to beat faster to get the blood to the working muscles compared to if you were fully hydrated. So your heart rate's higher. So if you just know that you get exhausted at a particular heart rate, you'll get there sooner if you're dehydrated. So just seeing that from the heat is really important. With the cold, it's a case where we'll test everyone before they submerge their hands in the cold baths, and then we'll test them afterwards. And we'll look at that difference in time from doing all the things they need to, harness off and on, jacket on, mittens on. The mittens are the last thing that you put on. And what's the difference in exposure? And then you can look at charts about when frostbite happens to exposed skin. You see, well, depending on the temperature, you might be looking at seconds, especially if there's a good wind chill. So it's seeing all of that and getting that practical experience really helps underpin the theoretical understanding of it. So yeah, I find it interesting. It's always a challenge to engage students with it, and I'm always quite buoyed when I find that they enjoy the storytelling that comes into it.
Do your students see you as a lecturer, or do they see you as an adventurer that tests these theories in real life?
Yeah, it depends if they turn up to the lectures or not, really. But the ones who come in for those gems right at the end, where I talk more about the extreme environments, yeah, they see that, and I have to have a chunk of time away for the Arctic expeditions, which really cuts into the teaching time. And it's great. I've got a really good team of people that can pitch in for a lecture or practical here and there. They do it quite willingly because they want to see me do the events and everything. And so it's really nice to hear that the students do as well, that they'll be following my tracker during a race just to see how I'm doing. And yeah, it all adds to it. And then yeah, fortunately people will then tune in and listen to like a podcast like this, or they'll read an article that I've written about it, and then they'll take a look at the university and say they want to come and they want to do the course, or they want to be a PhD student or something like that. That all helps support that I do the events, and they don't just underpin the teaching, but they actually help us kind of tangibly with sparking that interest and getting people to the course.
And again, with like sports now, like you say, the climate is changing anyway. The football goes places, the rugby teams go places. They're all looking at Formula One. Everybody's looking for that 1-2% gain at that top level. But even when you were just saying about the dehydration from the blood, and there your heart will have to beat faster, that can translate down to people that are, say, going to do the London Marathon. And we've seen it the last few years, where typically they train for, say, 4 or 5 months prior, which normally is wet and cold. And then come April, we've had some absolutely glorious days,
Yes.
very hot. And then they go, oh, X number of people have passed out and fainted and collapsed and had heart problems. Whereas actually, even just knowing that one little thing of, okay, shall I pace myself? I would like to go and do a PB, but the conditions put a precursor on it that I won't be able to do a sub 4 hour 30 marathon, or if somebody's going for a sub 3:30 or whatever it might be, actually having that little bit of golden nugget of going, I'll just keep my hydration up a little bit. I mean, we can digress into the whole level of electrolytes and the balance of stuff, but just knowing that mentally that 2% drop in cognitive function or dehydration has a factor on you're going to reach your peak zone quicker, therefore you'll tire out quicker, therefore I might not complete the marathon because the body will want to shut down.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
absolutely.
it's
Yeah,
fascinating, isn't it?
yes. I would say though, for anyone looking for their marathon PB, that the fastest marathon times tend to be run at around 12 degrees Celsius, relatively low humidity. So unless those are the conditions you've got, you're not going to get a phenomenal result. So accept that
Yeah.
and work yourself through with the conditions as they are.
And is there any research that you've done on that sort of stuff where you would say, right, that's the optimum? And if it's, say, 20 degrees with 46% humidity, you're likely to lose 10% off your top time that you've done previously. Let's say all marathons were the same incline and descents. Let's say they were all similar. Do you reckon there's a crossover? The higher the humidity or higher the temperature, there's a loss in performance?
Yeah, there absolutely is predictable reductions in performance with higher humidity or higher temperatures, but actually putting numbers on it is quite challenging because we never get that perfect identical race routes or identical racers from one year to the next. So you look at trends and you can see that, yeah, outside of those cooler temperatures and lower humidities, people will always take longer.
Yeah. And do you think having your science background has helped you take some of the guesswork out preparing for your extreme events?
Yeah, absolutely. From the very beginning, I took it that you might have undergraduate degrees in exercise physiology. I mean, that was enough to add on to my background in outdoors hiking, and at the time spending little holidays out in Egypt with my friends there and going for walks in the Sahara. That all kind of came together, but I sort of understood that, yeah, understanding the science um, helps me to understand what's happening. And when there are challenges, I can understand them a little bit better. So it will be things like, yeah, that dehydration or that electrolyte imbalances. I'll have some perhaps advanced warning on that because I'll be more aware or more sensitive to those issues. It's great for piling on the pressure as well, because you just imagine people will look at it as, well, you must know what you're doing because you've got the degrees, the PhD.
But then I suppose there's going to be that balance of, like you've just said, we're doing with your students, actually going on the 6-day field trip versus we can just walk into the chamber and get it done. I think there's a theoretical to actually the practical application. There's
Yeah.
still got to be sometimes there's that gap, there's a disconnect sometimes, but to bring it together, I think there's a
Yeah.
skill in that.
Yeah, across all of it. So it's the, it's a fitness. Oh, I know what the fitness requirements are. I know what might be the absolute best approach to training requirements. That doesn't mean that I can make it happen. Yeah, and so all the way through from where things go awry because it's a big distance, things will go awry, to yeah, just how you're set up at the start. All of those things you can perhaps have a better awareness from knowledge, but it doesn't necessarily help you to finish from the physical challenges of it. But it certainly has helped in races with others where they've perhaps asked me why something has happened to them, and I can offer some insights as to what it
Insight.
might be.
Does it also give you an idea from a nutritional point of view then that rather than say having your 7 pieces of fruit and veg and maintaining a general healthy diet, but when you're on these events, you need to change them and go, right, I know I need this level of macronutrients or whatever it might be, therefore I can get it in this concoction or in this way that is then light to carry, packs down. I don't have to worry about things like you went back to the vaccine run,
Yeah.
the serum run, that where it would be frozen, then you have to wait for it to thaw out. Those are all, or perhaps be too hot to consume and actually go over if you're running in the jungle or in the desert and stuff. Have you found that useful as well?
Yes, and nutrition with not just sports, but throughout lifestyles. Everyone, you've got people who will absolutely nail it and do things really well, and people that will go in the opposite direction and will not care at all about what they're putting in their bodies and will still do really well. So unless you're an elite athlete, nutrition often won't be the difference between where you're finishing, but it might be that there are other reasons why you want to dial in the nutrition, as it were, and make it as good as can be. So without wanting to take this conversation down a really dark route, I'll say that when you're out in the snow for 30 days, you really don't want to be constipated. You don't want to be squatting at -40, -50. Yeah, trying to push out a very dry brick. It's not a good way to spend time, and it does general health no good at all afterwards. So actually, these races, fiber is really important. So you're literally taking in things that you're not deriving any kind of calorific advantage from. You're taking it in for the good of your health, which actually helps with efficiency in some ways day to day, but is really important for health as is, for gut health as is. And so you're having it for that reason. Calories thing is where a lot of people go, but ultimately your body doesn't really know what a calorie is. You can't take like 1,000 calories of something that might just be oil based and imagine it's going to give your body the same benefits that 300 calories of something that's more nutritiously beneficial in other way. Your body uses nutrients differently, different tasks. So I actually had a study running through a master student of mine with the Iditarod the year that I did it. So we were doing questionnaires of the racers just to see what their nutritional approaches were. And most of them didn't really have an approach beyond it's just getting the energy in. You've just got to calories in. It doesn't matter what it is. So you'd have people getting down pizzas and things if they were going through a town where that was available. All they cared about was calories. Like a pizza, something that's full of that kind of grain material, a lot of it's just going to sit in your gut. You're not going to absorb it. It's 1,000 calories, but you're going to get 200 or 300 calories from the tomatoes that are in there and a bit of the cheese that's in there and a little bit of the wheat that you actually digest. A lot of it is just going to go straight through. It's added weight to your gut. It hasn't really helped you compared to if you just had something that was more available, that was better digested. So yeah, I was really surprised that across the board, pretty much no one really cared about nutrition beyond energy in, energy out. And it's kind of ironic because in a race, you're on a starvation diet anyway. You're using so much fuel that you can't replace it because it would be such a weight of food that you'd be carrying on the sled that you wouldn't be able to move with it. You'd be sort of struggling to do a couple of miles a day before your Achilles tendons exploded because you just can't take enough weight to match what you're using. The more food you carry, the more energy you have to put into transporting it, and it just becomes impossible. So you end up going very light, acknowledging you'll be in a calorie deficit, which really should mean that you're going to make those calories as effective as possible to help you through, whether it's things like mental focus. So there's very little on specific nutrients to help with the cold, but there's some evidence for some amino acids that can help with working memory and the ability to perform tasks. Because one of my big fears originally with the races in the cold was always that I'd lose my mind. I'd get cold, I'd get tired, and then I wouldn't know how to do key things to look after myself. And it really does happen to other racers, and there have been some horrific events where people have got a bit cold and then they've behaved irrationally. So there's interest in what can prevent that. And these are things that you might want to make sure your diet has plenty of, because it's going to be so different to what you have day to day normal life, where you're not thinking, oh, this has to be something that will work at -40, so on.
Yeah. But like you say, even coming back to putting your fingers in for frostbite, for that, if you've got to spend X number of minutes with your bare bottom in -30, you're then going to end up having too much of your body parts exposed. So actually, that's probably one of the fundamental things you'd, rather than focus on the calories in, calories out, is actually, do my bodily functions still remain a consistent thing? So actually, that's an efficiency from the race, because if you have to spend half a day being constipated, that's half a day that you're not making things forward, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
quite, again, something you wouldn't look at unless you had the scientific perhaps background of understanding what things do I need to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll impact things like fatigue state, how much energy you feel you have to work hard. So yeah, just efficient systems.
And I meant, again, even that must then come into the fact of, say, if we take like Ironman and those sort of extra long events where you're physically active at quite a high level for a time period, the dehydration element, you're probably not going to be able to absorb the amount of fluid you need because you're at a heart rate or at an intensity where your body wants to stay cool. A bit like you were saying with the Arctic, with losing your mind, there must be some evidence to suggest a certain level of fluid or a higher concentration of something might be more valuable than perhaps taking on a gel or a
Yeah.
calorie in, calorie out type approach.
Yes. And yeah, with the exposure to the heat, there are then all these other ways people are trying to understand what can we do to aid hydration or to aid cooling. So going back 30 years or so, you would have had people hyperhydrating before exercise. They're over consuming water. And then that became consuming a substance called glycerin, which would then allow them to absorb more water. And it would really help keep them cool for about the first half an hour of exercise, after which the kidneys have done their thing, everything's balanced out again, it's all returned to normal. So then there are things like cooling vests, and can you do cooling before exercise? So you bring your core temperature down a little bit. And then are there cooling products that can be used during exercise? And I was actually trialing one of these with a master's student a year or so ago, and it turned out that it'll cool, but with people exercising, they generate so much heat, the cooling effect is reduced, and then they're just wearing like this plastic layer that becomes an insulator, and it's all awful. So yeah, there's interest in what technology can work for people during exercise. And yeah, Formula One, it's can you use this sort of a vest that you could potentially just plug in USB port in the car, so you can use some battery power to keep a vest cooling during a race. And military, the same sorts of things are being investigated. What sort of stuff can work continually without needing to be removed and so on. But yeah, during the actual exercise itself, aside from that, you're just down to trying to get the electrolyte intake and the water intake correct, because if you overconsume water, which is something that happens during the marathon races especially, then you dilute your blood. So you dilute the amount of salt to water in the blood, and then that's deadly. So before that happens, of course, your performance will suffer considerably. You can't just take in any amount of water and imagine it will be of benefit. It needs to be balanced with electrolytes for those sorts of levels that you're taking in. Looking at taking in 8 litres potentially, if you just took in 8 litres of water, that would be lethal. You need to take in the salt that you're losing along with that water. So something that I heard triathletes would do is when they're on their bikes, they would actually lick their forearms, they'd lick the sweat, because that will give them an indication of the salt loss. Because if they're tasting that salty sweat, they'll either find that revolting, it's too salty, which means they don't need salt, or they'll think, well, this is pretty good. You know, this actually is quite palatable, which would be a good indication they need more of it. So they need to increase the electrolyte intake. Made harder because most electrolyte formulas don't have enough salt in them, because if they did, for the average person pretending to be an athlete, it would be unpalatable.
Yeah.
So when I do the trek with the students, I always tell them, bring electrolytes, bring extra sachets of salt as well, because when you're really dehydrated, you'll need the added salt.
And again, it's those little tips that you, by being in the science world and the research world, you have, I suppose, the luxury of being able to test X versus Y or B versus C, etc. And
Yes.
brings us nicely on into your sort of current research, and it's focused around human biomechanics, muscle stiffness, injury prevention, and movement economy. Is that about right?
Yeah. That's spot on, actually, for what I'm doing at the moment. I always sort of acquire undergraduate students, master students, and doctoral students who want to do specific projects. But my own one is very much on the biomechanics side. I currently have a project. I was awarded a bit of money to buy equipment to build a prototype device for measuring muscle stiffness. So what the stiffness is you feel it. People will be aware that they have tight hamstrings, for example. One side is suddenly tight during a run or during exercise. And when something is tightening, that is most likely a reaction to something. It didn't just get bored and thought, I know what will keep this guy interested for 2 minutes. I'm going to tighten up. That'll really throw him and get some attention. It's happened for a reason. So it could be that there's a little bit of an injury in there, or more likely you just knocked something, you just slightly twisted an ankle or you jolted the knee, And now all of a sudden the hamstring is tightening because it wants to make sure the hip only moves in a very select way and the knee only moves in a very select way. And it's all very controlled. And the muscles have to be tight to enable that to happen, because a healthy system has lots of variability in it. So if you think about getting a gait analysis, like you want to get some new trainers, you go to a shop and they'll put you on a treadmill. You shouldn't really be moving the same way with every stride. There should be subtle differences, which is how your body naturally reduces stress on joints. But if you keep doing the same thing and you get a bit of a knock, get a bit of an injury, the body doesn't want that variability because you might put stress through the injured area. So it has to tighten everything up and be super controlling. But then doing that means that that tight area is in itself going to become an injury risk. And it might be that the muscle or the tendon or the area between the two is going to tear. So understanding this problem is really important for injury prevention. And also when people have been injured, understanding when they can return to sport, when things have like evened up from one side to another. And the problem before that, which is what my PhD was sort of interested in, is we're talking about when people are moving, but what about when they're just relaxed? If you're laying down and I start moving your legs around, am I going to be able to tell that you've got tight hamstrings? And the reason that it's interesting from a physiotherapy perspective and a sports injuries perspective and what you do as an individual thing, is that the stiffness in your muscles when you're resting is determined by the amount of muscle you've got. So if I try and do like a hamstring stretch on you, if you've got a load of muscle mass there, that's a lot for me to work against versus if it's someone with very little muscle mass. Now, I've done these tests on children before who are gymnasts. So it's really difficult to get a measurement because there's so little stiffness there. And then you compare that to, say, a rugby player who's got so much mass, and you try and move the leg and it gets to about 30 degrees off the ground, and you're really struggling. And that's this inherent component based on the amount of mass that's there and the stiffness of the tendons themselves. So that's one component of your muscle stiffness. And the other one is how long the muscle is. So if you've done loads of stretching over years and years, then there'll be a certain level of flexibility. And when I try and move the muscle, it has to go further before we kind of get through the slack that's there and I start feeling any tension from there. This is an important problem to deal with to start with, is that most people don't have stiff muscles when they're relaxed. When you feel your hamstrings tight, that muscle hasn't suddenly shortened, and it also hasn't suddenly become massive compared to the other one. The idea that you're going to stretch it to deal with the stiffness probably isn't going to help, because it doesn't matter how many years you've been stretching or how many years you've been active for. The muscle hasn't suddenly shortened in the space of a couple of miles of running or whatever it is. It's an active issue. It's your body saying that it has to behave as if it's tight because there's pain or there's a injury susceptibility. So that means that the physiotherapy approach shouldn't focus on stretching the muscle. 6 weeks later, yes, your muscle will be less stiff because you've stretched it and you've increased the length of it a little bit. But if you've just gone out for a run and your hamstring suddenly started feeling tight, you don't spend 6 weeks stretching it, because that's not answering the problem. The problem is there was a bit of damage in the knee or a bit of damage at the ankle, and your body is just trying to prevent an injury from happening. So in that case, actually stretching it is kind of doing the opposite. Your body's trying to protect you from injury, and you're saying, I think you're wrong, mate. And you're just stretching it, trying to bully it into a position it is really trying not to be in to protect it. So there's that side that I'm testing, just that kind of groundwork. What should there be? And do we see that in people who perceive that one side is tighter than the other? Because I expect you probably don't, unless it's been tight for years, in which case it has actually adapted structurally over time.
And that's a really interesting point as well, because obviously you come back to, say, the physiotherapies or the healthcare based stuff, you're always table fit. So you're led against gravity is where you are. But actually, how does that, in biomechanics terms, how does that translate to upright fit, as it were, from laid down to upright or table fit to upright? Is gravity, and we have motion on it, is how how do you translate that from what people expect or what people do? They might go to Pilates or yoga and they're led on the floor and they go, oh, I can lift my leg up like that. But when I go for a run, I can't do it. And it's a bit like I'd imagine then in the gym, everybody's got to do the perfect squat, the perfect lunge, and it must only go this range. But what if you walk down the street and step off a curb and suddenly have to step back on the curb because there's a cyclist coming past you?
Yeah.
You haven't prepared. So what you're sort of saying there is your hamstring might be tight, which is the perhaps symptom, but the body is very quickly scans the whole, let's say the lower limb, very quickly to go, I didn't quite like how that ankle moved. I'm just going to ease off. I suppose then, a bit like driving on a motorway, you might have somebody undertake you and pull in 3 cars up. You're like, I'm just going to back off slightly because something up there I don't like the look of.
Yeah.
And you might hang back for a little bit and go, oh, they've pulled off at the exit, and then you can go back up to your normal speed. So there's a lot more to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that with the Pilates and yoga versus the gym work, something that is both interesting and irritating to me is that it will work to some extent. It will help people a little bit, but I have this kind of perfectionist attitude. I want to find the best way. I worked with manual therapists for years who would be trying to do their treatments based on, this was in a textbook somewhere or whatever it was, and they're going to do it. Oh, well, the person got better. So, okay, but what's the best technique? Because, they were going to get better over time anyway. So you did something and they got better, but what's the best? And things like yoga and Pilates, if you've got stiff muscles, will give you that lengthening. So it will reduce stiffness. So it will have an effect and it will help a little bit. And if you're looking at injury risk, then doing the work in the gym will make you a bit more robust. It will strengthen your muscles and tendons. So you have to push further before you get an injury. So you can argue there are places for both of them. But if I'm looking at this, I want to know, well, if someone comes to me and they've got this problem and they're at risk of injury, let's imagine it's an elite footballer and they're worth a fortune and the club kind of depends on them for revenue from the wins and so on. I can't be telling them to do something that's going to take them 3 months before they get any kind of improvement from it. I want to know what's the most effective thing I can do right now within the remit of a warm-up that is going to reduce their risk of injury. So that's the thing. I want to know what's kind of the perfection of the technique. What's the most efficient technique to help them? So that's where all of the measuring comes in. It's, well, I can do this. I can get people in and I can compare what does Pilates do? What does yoga do? What does the strength training do? What are the impacts of all of these? And what's something a little bit more creative, but also more logical? We're seeing this as it's protective of a problem. So let's look at it. If it's a neuromuscular cause, how do we get people moving a little bit better so they don't have to have this issue? So when I did the Iditarod last year, 1,000 miles, I had not trained well enough at all. I just got the new job. I was living deep dive into personal history there. I'd come over from Cambridge to Oxford. I didn't have anywhere to live. It took me months and months to find a place to live. I was between hotels and my Land Rover. So training was really sketchy. It was very minimal. And it meant that within the first couple of days of the race, I was getting overuse issues. And I was having to deal with them as they came. And there'd be the odd sort of knock or bump here and there. But a lot of it was just I hadn't done enough training to be sufficiently robust against those injuries. I was having to fix them as I went. And it was all that kind of conscious, what could be the cause of this? And then experimenting through lots of things that didn't work until I found something that did. And being able to release the tension in seconds, ultimately, after a couple of minutes of mucking around, but then being able to continue on and get the distances that I needed to. So, well, I can feel it. So I have an idea of what works for me. I need to know how I can measure it so I can help others and help them to feel it. Because you come to my lab, I could use £250,000 worth of biomechanics equipment, plus some things that I've built myself, duct taped together, and then I've used some very complex algorithms to do the equations and calculate the stiffness. How can I do this for anyone? How can I make this something that either people can do themselves and understand themselves to kind of self-manage, or at the absolute most, what is this device that I can build that people can use as therapists or in clubs and actually just measure people and say, okay, well, we're going to do this. And the advantage of doing so is that we can see when things are better. We can see when you can return to sport or when you might not be able to perform because your risk of injury is too great. So yeah, I like science. I like measuring things.
But then it gives us repeatability
Yeah.
rather than I think it's going this way. And I think
Yeah.
it's a whole spectrum of not necessarily one thing is going to be brilliant, but if you can benchmark, here is a trend of this style athlete, whether it's an endurance, a power, high explosive athlete, let's say tennis, for example, where they're going to be playing in different temperatures as well, but also they're going to have different variables coming at them. So actually, for them to be able to, say, put their toes pointing towards the ball, the other foot pointing this direction, but actually that was never going to be consistent all of the time. There's going to be lots of subtle variations, yet alone they've got to get power out of it. I remember being at college and seeing a lecturer put something up on the board, and it was a camera looking, I think it was Rafa hitting a forehand, and then they started pausing the video and leaving a mark where he hit the ball. And then I don't know how many thousands of shots it did or hundreds of shots. You'd actually see it looked to the naked eye, they were perfectly hitting the ball every time. But over a time, there was this sort of zone that they were making contact with. So my mind goes then, he's having to make micro adjustments to execute the ball going there, even though it looks like he's hitting the same shot every time. But there's
Yeah.
micro shots with it. And I suppose that's what you're saying with the gym, yoga, sport is find a baseline. What that baseline might be, it might be upright, but what can you do straight away in the warm-up to mitigate that injury or that tightness, or I suppose make the body feel alive and ready and prepared for the activities, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's a real challenge to be able to do this. I mean, what you would really want is to be able to watch athletes performing, whether they're footballers, tennis players, someone running, whatever it might be, and to be able to get a in real time indication of if they're starting to show signs of fatigue that is going to increase that risk of injury, or signs that
Yeah.
the tightness is too great and it's going to cause an injury or something. And it's a huge challenge because you're looking at the injury rehab side, you're looking at the injury prevention, you're looking at the sort of live performance observation, and you want to get data from it. You don't want to be able to, you don't want to pull people from the sport early if there's someone that is going to do really well, we're saying football or rugby or something, where a team might do really badly if someone's brought off too early, and you've brought them off early and there's nothing wrong with them. You were being overly cautious. The team lost as a result. I mean, there's pressure that these things have to be done to a very high level, very, very well, with huge consequences either way. The great thing about being a researcher is that there are so many other people working on the same problem. So you don't have to solve it. You just have to do a little bit. You just take things a step forward, and then someone else will be doing something kind of parallel, slightly different, and they'll get another answer and they'll do something else. So, you can always look at all of these techniques and approaches and see, well, this has worked in this way, hasn't worked very well. Can we build on it? Do we need to abandon it and try something else?
And it comes back
Yeah.
to your signs within the ultra races and the endurance races is you're aware, you're able to pick up on the smaller signs before they become a big sign, such as the dehydration, such as the fiber and little things like that. So it's the same as in elite sport, the margin of error is very, very small. And like you say, you can take a player off a moment too soon and they've lost the game, cost the club loads. You don't take them off and you leave them on a moment too late. They get injured, they come off, and they're out for 6 weeks doing it. If we then come back down to, say, the average runner, the fun runner, the park runner that does a couple of marathons, a couple of 10Ks, what do you think people are getting wrong about injury prevention, if there is a succinct way to answer that?
Yeah, so there's just too much hearsay, really. And there's also, I think, a misunderstanding of the complexities of the biomechanics. And things I like about science is you can always simplify things. You can find the easiest way to explain something, easiest way to observe something, but we can go too far with it. So for commercial reasons, people might be observed running on a treadmill, and this is something that could happen in a running shop. So you go into a running shop, you put on a treadmill, so I say, oh, you're moving this way, we need to give you these kinds of trainers. Well, that's assuming the problem is coming from the foot, and what's happening at the foot isn't a reaction to a problem anywhere else in the body, or it's the ankle, knee, hip, back, shoulder, any of it could be impacting how your foot hits the floor. So on one side, our movement is hugely complex, and if we are at risk of an injury or at risk of excess tightness, just movement inefficiencies, understanding it currently isn't really possible. I can use my lab, say, £250,000 worth of equipment plus all these sorts of add-ons. I can't tell someone how they're supposed to run. No one knows how someone is supposed to run. That data doesn't exist. If you look at research articles, they can tell you about averages. Or when someone's running, their hip moves through this range on average. But that is a mean value from a population. That's not what you're supposed to do. In exactly the same way, you could say the average person is 1.72 meters tall. That doesn't mean that other people are a problem if they're not that exact height. It doesn't mean that people need to have bits added on or bits of legs chopped off or something. It's just, we work by reporting averages because it's useful to see an average, but that's not a goal. So just because someone moves in a slightly different way to the average, it doesn't mean that it's wrong in itself. It doesn't mean that they're going to get an injury because they're a bit different. We're all individuals and so on. But the interventions similarly need to start from a perspective of, we've observed this, we don't know that we've seen the problem. We may have just seen a symptom or an indication of a problem. So yeah, there have been cases in the past where it was observed that, say, Kenyan runners were all overpronating, so they were given shoes that corrected it, and they all got shin splints and knee problems and couldn't run anymore. You can't do these kind of blanket prescriptions that are overly simplistic. So as much as I don't like complexity in things, I want things to be simple. The reality is that human movement is inherently very complex, and problems that arise are even more complex because we're looking at numbers of muscle fibers or bundles of muscle fibers that are moving in 3D and pinpointing where the problem is coming from that could be well away from the actual measurable signs of that. Yeah, it's a huge challenge. I mean, I can't cover someone in electrodes that tell me how their muscles are firing. I can put electrodes on individual muscles, but not every fiber. I can't see which ones are specifically overactive. I might get an indication from how someone moves, but it's still not telling me what I need to fix or how I will go about fixing it. So that's really, we're still understanding that problem, and there's lots of data being produced, and we're all making these little steps forward, but we're nowhere near that finish line. We're nowhere near having it. And yeah,
Well,
this is
it's a bit like then trying to say, I'm cooking pasta and I've got it all in the bowl and I want to just test if it's done. So you take one out and you eat it, but you're now taking a mean average that one piece of pasta you've tasted, or two, means that the rest of them are cooked. Well, some are going to be closer to the bottom, so they might be hotter. Some at the top might be slightly cooler, and it's the same with bundles of muscles. And it was lovely you addressed that the body works in 3D. I think, again, a lot of simplicity is the body only moves in that way at that particular joint, whereas actually the joint will feel 3 dimensions. So it's almost like a Rubik's Cube. You're trying to guess how to get something round, but you don't know if it's going to come this way, if it's going to come this way, or you've got to tilt it back. There's, like you say, a lot of guesswork.
Yeah. And it's that cooking thing is a good example for the average as well. This needs to be cooked for 20 or 25 minutes, and some people will think 22 and a half is exactly right then. That's the number.
Which is fascinating, and I think there needs to be, like you say, a lot more perhaps debunking of the... Yes, it's lovely to take a complex subject into something simple, but if you're just starting at the base of simple, you're hidden by, I suppose, naivety of not knowing what you don't know, and probably ego behind it. Whereas you say, if you do a bit of research, it just moves the needle a couple of degrees forward. Somebody else picks it a couple more degrees forward, and you build momentum, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a very elegant system, and we like that. The challenge for the average non-academic is understanding what's scientifically sound and what is utter nonsense, pseudo-scientific drivel, because the people who are producing the drivel have got much more time on their hands. They probably haven't got a proper job. They're trying to make money from selling the drivel.
Selling
And
the
so
thing that
that's,
they've made from the dribble, like a
yeah,
pair of socks with extra grip on it, and trying to class
yeah,
it as, I don't know, the best thing to stop over pronation and, I don't know,
yeah,
plantar fasciitis or something ridiculous like that. And
yeah,
all it is a slightly thicker sock that they bought from the supplier of a well-known sock company or something, you know?
yes, yeah. Because I have to say that the academics are busy. We're busy people, and we don't get very much time to do things like this and to actually engage or to produce content. And it's great to be invited to do it, because then it's okay, I can put this in my calendar. But if my living was based on getting people observing social media content, and whether that was me trying to sell a commercial product or just getting sufficient hits that I was getting something through advertising, I mean, that's the only way you can do it. You would have to have that approach as your job. It's not full-time academia where at the end of the day you're tired enough and you don't really want to do anything in addition to that. So we have all these people producing stuff because they have a vested interest in it, and they're getting that content out on TikTok and YouTube videos and so on. And there's such a bulk of that that's what most people see, and we kind of have this inbuilt assumption. If we're hearing these things, if we're hearing enough of it, we're more likely to believe it than something that we're hearing very little of and that might seem more abstract to us. But that's that one thing that's come from a academic study that was picked up by a newspaper, and then that got kind of
Spun around,
was
yeah.
seen as unusual, so was put in the public domain. So yeah, it's a real challenge. It's a failing of academia, really, that we do need more people acting as translators of this kind of content we're producing into the public domain in a way that's useful. And why not find ways of generating revenue from it?
Well, I mean,
Even if it simply hits on things.
and that's the transition, isn't it? But I think when you're so engrossed in moving the needle forward, because I think let's say you've got pioneers that they just say inherently know this might work or might achieve something, and it's helped, let's say, 100 people they've worked with. Then the scientists can come along or the researcher can come along and go, okay, I'm going to take that and I want to prove or disprove it or see how repeatable it is. And then you then get people that might be enthusiastic about the subject that might discover an open source paper and go, wow, that sounds really great. But they've then deleted, distorted it, and reimagined it with the knowledge they've got. They then have got the following on the YouTube or social media, and they go, wow, did you know by pulling up your socks to just below your shin will reduce your risk of tendinopathy in your Achilles tendonitis based on blah, 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 blah. And it gets sort of carried away. Somebody picks it up and goes, wow, yeah, we got... And you're like, no, that's got distorted. So I think we've almost got to distrust everything and
Yeah,
then find a way.
absolutely.
If we can summarize them for somebody that's just jumped in listening to this and understanding about trying to understand how do I prevent injuries, we've covered so much in this bit so ready, is in a nutshell, we then need to find that they would almost want to perhaps do variety of exercise. Sorry, no, let's say they've got all the noise from their hamstring, but actually it might not be their hamstring, that's just the noise. It could be from above or below their body, which is a bit like the social media. There's lots of noise, but actually we've got to distill the noise and understand it's much more of a complexity chain.
Yeah.
And just doing those hamstring isolated stretches or mobility work or strength work might not actually achieve the outcome they would want.
Yeah.
How could we sort of summarize those things for the Mrs. Jones who's listening that thinks, have I
Sure.
got a stiff hamstring or something?
So I'd say, to start with, don't stop doing things you love doing. Keep doing things that you enjoy, and there will be transferable benefits from doing them. Absolutely. But if you think that there is an underlying precursor to an injury just there that might at this stage simply be impacting efficiency or whatever, then the best you can really do is to get it checked by a good physiotherapist who is the sort of forward-thinking individual that's happy to try something to get that hamstring working a little bit better, and then observe what happens next and try and chase those issues out of the body and get you moving better. Yeah, something that you kind of mentioned much earlier on to bring in is, if it's all done on the couch, it's not enough. It needs to be observation during movement. seeing how that actually feeds into the movement that you're after, whether that's kind of walking, running, jumping, whatever the activity
Whatever
might
it
be.
is. Yeah. Okay. That's a nice place to start then, isn't it? And I suppose an open-minded approach of going, this is the
Yes.
end goal we would like to achieve. How do we do it? A bit like we'd like to get the pasta on the plate, but what cooking methods would we use? Is it 22.5 minutes, 21
Yeah.
minutes? Do we need to go on a big gas hob? Do we need to do an induction hob or something like that?
Yeah.
If we park the injury stuff for the moment and the research for the moment, obviously you've done and seen a hell of a lot in the last 20 years of your endurance. Obviously you've hauled sleds and paddled across continents and battled jungle heat. What do you think of have there been sort of funny moments that you've had along the way, or some ridiculous moments that you've had along the way, that's rather than, say, having some bowel issues and having a very cold bottom?
Yeah. Well, so I have occasionally been filmed doing things. None of it ever made it anywhere. Always dropped from the final cuts, which is why I love the writing. So I write books because I can write everything that happened. You know, the good and the bad, the hilarious. It can all go in there. But filming is never really something that works as well, because you're just scanning a moment. And if I am ever put on film, I'm usually smiling because I'm doing what I enjoy doing. That doesn't mean I've been like going through hell or something inside. It's just in that moment, and I've just had contact with a human being. So I'm not the person I was when the camera wasn't on me. And the way around that would usually be, well, film yourself. But again, when things are really bad, and an example would be during the Yukon quest, there was a point where my sled was kind of ready to slide off the side of a mountain. It was really windy. Snow had become like ice crystals blasting my face, and I was on my knees next to my sled. It had been tipped over. I'd had to right it again, and then it wanted to slide off the mountain. So I was on my knees over the top of the sled, face getting blasted and all the rest of it. The last thing I can do while I'm trying to move along centimetre by centimetre on my knees to get away from this particular spot is get the GoPro out and start filming myself, saying, well, I'm in a bit of a pickle here. I actually did do something quite similar to that, though, during the Iditarod last year, because the situation was allowing me that time. And that was within 30 miles of the end of this almost 1,000-mile race. I had to cross a little river. And so it was really thick, deep snow. And I've started moving across it, and I've just sunk through to my waist. Because I'm going down from the riverbank, I'm going down to move across and up. My sled is actually quite high behind me, so it's pushing me down into the snow. So I couldn't just try and clamber up, because all I'd be doing is sort of somehow working myself deeper in. And that was genuinely a moment where I got my camera out and just filmed myself as, in a bit of a pickle here. Don't know how much snow is underneath me. Don't know what the ice conditions like on the river, but I had to then put the camera away, take the sled off. So I had to remove this harness, push it down, and it just ended up kind of laying over the top of my trekking poles and trying to worm my way out of this little hole and find something that I can actually stand on. These little things come in, and they're usually really dangerous at the time. But you just kind of reflect back that life is all about experiences, and you just have to kind of laugh them off and move on. But mostly these adventures have moments of, abject peril and terror that don't last very long. Most days are just very straightforward, verging on boring if you haven't got a lively imagination. So the things that really kind of come to you are those. But the first time I raced, I was getting lots of hallucinations, which were, brilliant in a way. They were quite entertaining. But I was going across a mountain ridge, and it's Arctic, and it's midwinter, winds are howling, and up ahead of me I could see this monster I think it was from the Never-Ending Story. It wasn't, but in my mind at the time, that's exactly what it was, and it was just there. You couldn't have convinced me otherwise, but it was in front of me. And you'd see things like, your mind isn't fully hallucinating, but it's going down that route. I'd see things like these tall spruce trees that are kind of bent over a little bit because of the weight of snow on them. And because they're leaning over more at the top where they're smaller, it almost looks like shoulders, and it almost looks like a head on top. And so, well, this is this massive monster next to the trail ahead of me. and you're processing it, saying, "Oh, I know it's just a tree with snow on it," but at the same time, my head is following it as I'm walking past it, thinking it might try and trip me up now. It might just grab me. It might go for me. And it's these kind of entertain you, and you think, well, I'm not going to fight it. I'm not going to try and burst out of the hallucinations and force myself to be awake, because they might come on really strong in a way that I can't fight it. So I'll just let myself enjoy the stories that are presenting themselves. I had a friend, an Austrian guy racing, who had told me that almost the same spot, after we started descending from the ridge, he saw a British racer, a friend of mine, in his tent, and he was set up having his hot chocolate is in his sleeping bag. He shouted out to this guy, "Klaus, come in, have some hot chocolate, have a rest for a while." And they were having this conversation, and he said, Klaus told me afterwards, it was only because he couldn't see any trail around the tent that he realized the whole thing was a hallucination, and he was about to lie down in the cold and drink a hot chocolate that wasn't there, have a conversation with this English racer who'd finished days before. But yeah. So perilous,
Yeah.
and at the same time quite amusing. It was, I think, the same year or the year after, I was charging a wolverine in the last half marathon of this 430-mile race, because I was annoyed with it, because it was in the trail. It was genuinely a wolverine in the trail. It's the only animal that will scare a bear off its prey. It can be very mean and super aggressive. And I didn't know that. I didn't know what it was. I just saw this small mammal in the trail. And as I moved towards it, it was kind of like Taz. It would just become this blur and reappear 30 meters down the trail. And then I get closer to it, and it would do exactly the same thing. And it repeated this a couple of times. I thought, why aren't you scared of me? Why aren't you leaving the trail? And in the end, I ran at it, banging my trekking poles together, making all this noise, thinking, you should be scared of me. I'm much bigger than you. And it just kept doing the same thing, not fussed, just went a little bit further so it could carry on doing what it was doing. And yeah, it was a wolverine, wasn't scared of me at all. Beats up bears for a living. So,
Wow.
yeah.
And that must be quite an interesting thing when you're going, is that really a real thing, or am I also hallucinating, if you've got experiences of those hallucinations as well?
Yeah, I was in exactly the same spot on another year that I raced. I was charged by a moose. And at the time, I was processing so slowly with other things going on around me that I didn't react to it. And I didn't know if it was real or if it was a hallucination, because I'd been having so many up to that point. And it was quite a young moose. And just when it was a couple of meters in front of me, it just veered off and just ran up the side of a hill. And it completely went from my mind. I was so exhausted. Finished the race. It was only when I was getting a lift back along the highway in a car, I saw two moose run away from the side of the road, and I suddenly got this flashback of this event that had happened. I potentially tried to hide out of shock, but it all came back, and that was thought it was a hallucination, but it was very, very real.
Wow.
Moose are stupid. They kill quite a few people, and yeah, there have been some really close calls with.
So I guess there must have been quite a few times then you might have actually thought to yourself, what on earth am I doing here?
Yeah, yes. But interesting that it was all focused on my very first race out there, when I had these acute hallucinations. I mean, that was the longest race I'd done at that point, 430 miles, and I was fairly sleep deprived. My sled was far too heavy, like 3 times heavier than it needed to be, because I didn't know what I was doing. So yeah, I was hugely fatigued, which caused those hallucinations to happen. But they never happened again during those races, even though I would work harder, but my kit was much less and I was moving much more efficiently, and yeah, managed myself better. Yeah, that was an isolated race when that all happened.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Like, you put yourself through these, and I mean, I think there's one when you were back in 2016 in the Yukon Quest again, when you had, was it frostbite on your face, a broken rib, and then you obviously had the wolves, which you were just saying, on the trail. Would there be any sort of, I suppose, have you obviously had more unexpected challenges than you perhaps have seen coming?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because one of the things that draws me to the races is I love problem solving. I want to know how I can answer a particular question, like a research question in my academic life. And when I'm racing, I want to know how I can continue to make progress, how I keep putting one foot in front of the other to get to the end. And when I first raced, I had all this kit because I didn't know what I was doing and had no experience of dealing with problems in that environment. So I had everything with me I thought I'd need. And then over the years, it got lighter and lighter because I realized I could actually improvise with quite minimal kit. Funnily enough, when I went back to the Iditarod, since I've been going back, my kit has been getting heavier again because I've realized the things that really can't be improvised. And I've understood there are greater dangers in that particular event that require more kit. And so for progress and efficiency, if things go wrong, I need more things. But it's that sort of toolkit. It's having these things with me that I know I can use in particular ways to deal with whatever problems. It's things like with the wolves, there was a pack of maybe 15 or so wolves on this stretch of river, and it was dark, and my head torch started going. It's like, well, easy enough, change over batteries. I'd always have a spare head torch in a pocket. It's these things that I need to be able to navigate. I need to be able to see what happens. Normally, I'd be quite happy to just go along with it getting darker because there's usually enough light from some stars or the moon or whatever to be able to navigate. But in an environment where it might be a little bit dangerous, like I don't want to accidentally kick a wolf in the face because I've tripped into the pack, I want to be able to see what I'm doing. Statistically, incidentally, fine from wolves, never going to be attacked by them. But there'll be cases of people being kind of followed by the odd sick wolf or starving wolf or something like that. Statistically, you're safe, but statistics, it doesn't stop you from feeling vulnerable in the moment. So it's almost a privilege to be able to feel vulnerable as an adult. It's the monsters in the bed that scared you as a child thing, and now you're actually out there and say, well, no, these are real monsters in the wilderness, but I know that they shouldn't attack me. There were cougars that could have done. There were mountain lions out there that I was sharing trail with, but fortunately didn't actually trip across each other at any point.
No.
That one I had frostbite. Get a little bit. I don't really care so much about frostbite to the face. It's never been an oil painting anyway, so that it'll just heal. But I got frostbite on my fingertips as well, which was somewhat more alarming. But again, you've got this sort of toolkit, these things that you can use. So I had some hand warmer pads, which I don't like using because I want to know I can look after everything myself, so I can use my mittens properly and so on. So the mittens I had with me hadn't been manufactured properly. I didn't know that until afterwards, but a model that had been fine for me in the past didn't work this one time, got frostbitten fingertips. Okay, well now is the time to use these hand warmer pads. And because I've been carrying them around with me during these races for years, they didn't work. I was unaware at the time, amongst other things I was unaware of, that they have a best before date. And so I didn't know that. So used a pair, didn't work. Took out another pair, they didn't work either. Struggled on, eventually was all right. Managed to warm up my hands the old-fashioned way, just using the mittens and so on, and lots of flexing of fingertips, and got it back and got to a cabin a couple of days after. Continued on, and temperatures improved. So yeah, that was exciting. That one, that was also one where I fractured quite a few ribs in my back. I fractured ribs before. I used to do martial arts and things like that. There was an occasion where I got a good kick into my ribs and smashed a few. I was working as a personal trainer at the time, and it didn't actually bother me that much. But this time when I was hauling a sled and it was ribs in my lower back that were fractured, that was acutely painful. That hurt when I was breathing, but it turned out it didn't hurt anymore to be hauling a sled around. The fear factor then was if I fell over again, and I fell over in such a way as to get some of those ribs loosed and lancing through organs, that would be a game over. And then I relied on statistics to say that the chances of falling over again, having not fallen over other than that one time in all those 1,000 miles of racing, and to then not only fall over once more, but to fall over in a very, very specific way to cause this sort of injury. It's a non-zero, but nevertheless negligible risk.
Yeah.
So carried on.
Which is
Mother
nice.
wasn't happy, but
Nice to use the science to debunk the instinct of the human mind, isn't it, really?
Yeah. Using statistics to my advantage for all insecurities as they arise.
And when you think about all your adventures, what do you think has been like the biggest mindset shift you've been given, or they've given you?
Yeah, challenging one, because the mindsets are often, I would say they're incremental. There are steps that have been made. So going to the Yukon Quest for the first time, that was a big solo expedition. It was building on what I'd done before. but it was that independence and it was the self-reliance and it was the ability to enjoy the environment. I did an event the year after that where I was on a fat bike doing 1,000 miles or so from the Arctic Ocean at the very top of Canada coming south. So it was a different event because it was a different mode of transport. Things needed to be much more compact on a bike versus on a sled where it could just be a mess of everything. And that was along highways that I was using. So I was on these ice roads that were used in ice road truckers,
Yeah.
the top of the Yukon Territory and Northwest Territories. So that was interesting because I was interacting with people much more. But something I learned, there were 3 young women doing the route in the opposite direction, so also on bikes coming up that road. And we met and we had a conversation about the interactions we'd had with locals. And something that became apparent was people are driving, they've got loads of spare food with them because they imagine they might break down or something, they need extra stuff. So people were giving me loads of food and beer. I was getting lots of alcohol and I was being offered cocktails and things like that. And some young guys stopped and gave me some curries, things like that to cook up. And it was absolutely fantastic. All these wonderful surprises and human interactions. And it turned out, for whatever reason, people were giving the women fruit. They were giving them really healthy foods. For me, it was beer and curries. So very strange. So everyone wanted to help, and that was great. Everyone wanted to help whoever they could, but they were quite sexist about their help they were giving.
Yeah.
Which was an interesting one to realize. But that one was even more something where I wanted to interact with the people. So I was going through not just First Nations communities, but just homesteads, just First Nations homesteads where people sort of put me up for a night and give me food and coffee and so on. And it was really nice because it changed from that racing perspective. I've got to get to the finish line. I need to manage myself there and do it in a way that, do me proud, or I'm going to get my podium finish or whatever it is. And now it was, no, I'm going to maximize my experience. I'm going to learn. I love learning anyway. So just spending time with other people, was fantastic. There was a trip I did years ago in Assam at the top of India. What made that one challenging was being a celebrity because of my skin color, which was so strange. But some people thought it was fantastic that I was going to visit their communities. I was just passing through. So I was hiking, had loads of gear, hiking through Assam from top to bottom. And it was an unplanned trip. I was supposed to be doing something with a friend of mine who was Indian, and we were going to go together to these other areas in the Himalayas. But she had to drop out because of work commitments at the last minute, which meant that I suddenly needed to get a permit for regions and lots of obstacles, and Assam was somewhere I could get to. So just did this trip, and I was going through places being told that because of my skin color, I would be potentially taken hostage. People go missing. I'd be sort of these terrorist events by certain groups who don't appreciate the government encroaching on their rural land and trying to modernize. So there were all these kind of protests taken in different regions of India that I was witnessing while I was out there. But in Assam in particular, sometimes I'd be picked up by the local police and they'd walk me into their police station. And I mean, they'd be lovely. They'd give me dinner, I'd drink some rum with them or whatever. Badminton was a really random one. But they'd be getting senior police officers from the state coming over to interview me about why I was there. Was I aware of the dangers? I mean, I was having to spend nights in police stations where the staff were sleeping. So yeah, that was the strangest experience I've had on any kind of expedition or adventure. It was being that kind of alienated by the local community. And so yeah, the police would stop me, the army would stop me. If I tried going off through the jungle, then rangers might catch up with me. Oh, well, why are you going through the jungle? Aren't you worried about tigers and elephants and things like that? And so, well, on occasion I am, like when I can hear there are tigers and elephants around, I'm very concerned about those. They'd be like, oh, you need to go out to the road. So, well, if I go out to the road, then the police and the army stop me and tell me I can't be there. And I can't levitate. I can't float above the jungle or the road. I need to travel somehow. But yeah, people would come out, they'd meet me. I'd go into villages and people would be walking up like the footpaths from their homes or their driveways to see me because someone had a phone call ahead to say there's a white guy coming through, and the whole village would turn out to meet me and sometimes give me a tour of a tea plantation or whatever, sit me down, treat me really, really well. So the people were super friendly and wonderful. And then the police and the army and the rangers were very, very cautious. But it was a kaleidoscope of experiences that were completely mad. And there was the danger. It was hugely entertaining. People generally were lovely, inviting me into their homes, sometimes for days, not wanting me to leave, like giving me tours of the local area. Yeah, wanted me to spend time like with their children, with them, conversing with them to help their English or just to give them that experience. I left a town and a guide caught up with me. So local chap, he would have been Muslim, so he was wearing all the sort of Muslim clothing for that region, and he had his daughter with him. He was a young girl, I guess, 7 years old, something like that. And he came out because he wanted to see me and show his daughter. And someone else did the same thing. They drove up to me, stopped at the side of the road. He said, "Oh, I just want my daughter to see the white guy who's moved through." And then the girl did a little dance when they drove away because she was so happy she'd just seen a white guy. And so I was going into schools as well, just to meet people and give talks. But it was this wonderful kind of different perspective of things. Out there, that doesn't carry across because everyone was the same and there were no real standout differences to the people you'd see day to day, except the 6'2" white guy walking through. And if I stopped like at a bus stop or something, just to sit down and drink some water and have a bit of food, people would walk out and they would just stare at me. Like they'd come into the bus shelter and they'd just stand there staring in a way that was just,
What a
really
cultural
alienating.
experience, though, as well. Like a cultural experience, isn't it? And it's not an assault on the senses, but sort of overwhelm on the senses, isn't it?
Yeah,
Nice that they took an interest in you anyway.
Yeah, it was just so different. When I left the police station, one of the ones that I stayed at, so I'd said goodbye to the police officers that were there and awake at the time, moved off down the road, left the village. And then, someone, I think it was a gentleman in his 70s, had cycled out to see me because he'd heard I'd passed through, but he hadn't met me. So he came out to see me. And meanwhile, people who were walking to and from work between like the tea plantations and the village, they'd all then been distracted by seeing me. So all of a sudden there's a crowd of 30 people standing around me as I'm talking to this gentleman. And then one of the senior police officers drove up to say goodbye because he hadn't had the chance before. And he was clearly shell-shocked by this gathering that had occurred around me and the realization that it was all lovely people. They were all just being friendly. They wanted to welcome me. They wanted to meet me and all the rest. Whereas they'd very much been on the cautious side, thinking that there were the bad elements there that might take advantage of my being there. And there were some horrendous events that occurred while I was there, but I was independent of all those things. I only got to see the best examples and was made to feel very uneasy by people just imagining I was something like a fascinating creature.
And one final question. If there's somebody listening that's on the fence of pushing themselves or going to be doing something that's scary or uncomfortable for them, what would you say to them?
Something that an Indian friend once told me, which is the cloud clears as you enter it.
Okay.
It applies to so much. You can never know beforehand what the experience will be like exactly. You can't plan for everything that might happen. You just have to get yourself to a level where you think, I'm about as ready as I can be, and then you have to do it. And you have to just commit to doing it, and then you will make it happen because you will have committed to it.
And what was the phrase again from the Indian person you said?
The cloud clears as you enter it.
Cloud clears as you enter it. Very strong, isn't it? That's a very wise person.
Yes.
Interesting.
She certainly was someone I met on a race as one of the support crew. And one of many great friendships that has grown out of these doing these events or visiting these parts of the world.
Mark, thank you so much for today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. We've covered a hell of a lot, which is fantastic. And thank you for coming on the show.
Again, thank you very much for having me on.
Be a part of 360 Life Stories. Subscribe and join our emailing list to get exclusive insights, episode highlights, and behind-the-scenes stories straight to your inbox. It's the best way to stay inspired between episodes and never miss the next great conversation.